My name is Michael Seaman, and I'm going to be talking about heritage conservation districts and economic development. And the question we're going to be asking is, what impact does the designation of heritage conservation districts have on an area's economic development? And it's a very important question. I mean, for those of us that are converted and support heritage conservation, conserving heritage is a key thing. But, when you go and do a heritage district study, you're dealing with all sorts of members of the population and varying interest in whether something is historic or not. And but you need to pull together a team and have everyone working together. And having the economics working right, being able to show that either the property values or the business in an area, if it's a commercial district, are equal or even more prosperous is a good thing. And there are some great examples out there, and we're going to be presenting those to you today. The first person that I'm going to have up though is we've got two Paul Kings, and it's an old joke, but you've got two great guys, and plus Rick and Anke Lex speaking today. The first Paul King that we'll have is Paul Arking, who joined the Ontario Ministry of Ontario Tourism, Culture and Sports in 1988 as Culture Service Advisor in the Programs and Services branch, and is responsible for Southwestern Ontario. He provides advice and assistance to municipal staff and property owners involved in the designation of property and districts under the Ontario Heritage Act, and with the implementation of local heritage property tax relief and other heritage incentives. Paul studied architecture and urban planning in London, UK, and was just regaling me with all some of the interesting projects he worked on over there in the early part of his career. And he's a retired member of the Ontario Professional Planners Institute and the Canadian Institute of Planners, and a great fixture in the conferences and knowledge to us municipalities about what to do and how to interpret the Ontario Heritage Act. So without further ado, Paul R. King.
Sit down. I know what they are.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think Michael just wanted to see if you were awake, and there's no R. Okay, so so that's always been my kind of let off. I don't have an initial. It's happened several times. I've had been at schools, there are people with the same name, and they're getting more letters than I am, and every time, that's not me. Anyway, good morning all, and as the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport spokesperson, well, I'd say that it's a pleasure to be speaking to you today. I've had 20 plus years I've been actually with the ministry, and virtually most of that time, primarily a lot of my time was dealing with heritage conservation districts. And so in this short time, I'll just give you a very quick overview, but and my colleagues there will be able to fill you in about what really the success stories from the time when I joined the ministry, thinking, well, what do these people know about districts? Districts cost too much money, and significantly, it's really, I think it's taken on, and I think if anybody here don't know what a heritage district is, anybody put up your hand and say, have you never heard of, or you don't know what the difference is between? No? So that's great. It actually proves something. So I'll get on with my presentation, and it's going to be a brief overview of very brief overview of the legislation, the benefits of heritage designation. I mean, we talk about economic impact, but to me it's the benefits are the benefits, because it's all tied in with where there are community benefits in terms of financial or just in terms of social well-being. So it's the whole impact is just broader than just economics, I would say. And very quickly, a brief talk about the types of districts, because there are very type of districts and of various sizes, and I'm not going to go into too much about that. And very briefly about tools and incentives. So you've got a district, or you think about a district, and how will you approach your municipality and say, look, this is a great tool, great concept, and they'll say, well, yeah, great, but what's it in for? Why would people want to go into it? And what if you're a property owner, you're going to say, well, why would I want a layer of bureaucracy over my property? So, and then some, as I mentioned, some examples. And the legislation is very, very simple. Section 41(1) of Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and we always talk about Part 5 designation in this sort of field, as opposed to Part 4 about municipal individual properties. The Heritage Act simply says that when you have an official plan provision, municipality may designate the municipality or any defined area as a heritage conservation district. And the next statement says that once you designate the district, then every property, any owner who is going to carry out alterations or demolition requires a permit, and it's up to council to make decisions on the appropriateness of whatever work. And since following the 2005 amendments to the Act, it was made a requirement, and the Act was kind of, for the want of a better term, beefed up to make it clear, to clarify what are the requirements, and to create the appropriate tools to make districts more effective. So the key provision is you have to adopt a plan. And within the plan, there have to be statements of objectives that the municipality wants to achieve, explanation of the district's cultural heritage value or interest, very importantly, the description of the heritage attributes, and then description of minor alterations that can be carried on without a permit. That last provision was very important because that was to answer the concerns that had existed before, because strictly speaking, the Heritage Act actually did say any alteration. And surprisingly enough, and I give credit to Markham and 1 or 2 municipalities, they said, look, we can't, it's not something you can just actually operate without any clear guidance. So what they did was they made their own local rules, like if you didn't need a building permit, then you wouldn't need a heritage permit. So if you don't need a building permit, you don't need a heritage permit. Or sometimes they delegate it to staff what our minor alteration does and how does an alteration affect the property. So, but since the 2005 changes to the Act, it's very clear. Every plan has to have a statement of minor alterations. So likely it's going to be painting to historic colors or painting existing colors, replacement roof with exact material, that kind of statement. So it gives a lot more comfort to the property owner within the district, and for the planners themselves, it makes it makes the implementation process much simpler. And the final point here, the importance of the district plan. When you adopt a district plan, it actually prevails over any other municipal bylaw or municipal program or project in the event of a conflict. So it's very clear that if your official plan is not up to date, and as simple as the official plan or the secondary plan talks about heights of properties and there is no height restriction, the district plan would have a statement that no building should be 3 stories or no higher than what is existing, and that provision would trump whatever the official plan may say. And so that's I'll mention later on that there's a need to have these types of plans and the Heritage Act and the official plan to be working together. So what are the benefits? What are the benefits for designating a heritage district? Essentially, if you think about the normal planning for any area without a heritage district, without a Heritage Act provisions, generally you're talking about efficiencies of transport, or you're talking about physical development. We talk about, but then when you get to design values, some secondary plans talk about quality of design, etc., etc. But when you consider that, if you're looking at heritage, and through a designation through the Heritage Act with the district plan, you have a unique planning framework which is based on the respect of the community's history, sense of identity, and vision for the future, and that is something that a local community develops for itself. Yes, you can look at other areas and say, let's borrow from them, but ultimately it is the local community, right? Whether Collingwood, Port Hope, or Midland wants to designate a district, it's going to be something that's local, and that's something the community will itself identify and in terms of a vision for the future. And it goes without saying, this will help to enhance the quality of life and sense of the place. It allows the community to recognize, protect what it values within the area. Then, in terms of today's talk, it promotes cultural and economic vitality, contributes to the development of a rich cultural environment. And if you're a developer and you say, look, I have a choice between investing here or there, why wouldn't I invest in, well, I don't want to mention, or Markham, or people always talk about Niagara Lake. Wow, everyone says Niagara Lake. We know what Niagara Lake is, but Niagara Lake is not where, somewhere else down, I was about to say Osher, but I will. We talk about area, municipalities and communities that have a sense of identity, so this is, without belaboring the point. So just to give you an idea what type of districts there are and how many there are. There are now 111 since 1980 across 40 municipalities. And those of you who were in the know, the Heritage Act was adopted in 1975. And for 5 years, there were no districts. No municipalities were probably looking into these. But they needed some sense of, some encouragement and direction. So the province, through the Ontario Heritage Foundation at the time, provided a funding program, and on the basis of the funding, 50% funding, if I recall, a lot of municipalities bought in and went into the concept and ideas and started to designate districts. And so in that time, we're talking about 30-something years, initially it started off slowly, and then when the provincial funding ended, it kind of tailed off a bit. And to our surprise at the ministry, because we had funding programs which were terminated, and we had this particular program that was terminated, we thought, well, everything is going to come to a standstill. And in fact, when grant programs end, we always have municipalities saying, oh, well, people they want to repeal the designation, they don't want to be designated anymore, so, what's the incentive? So, but to our surprise at the time, all right, we went out, we continued to go out to train, we developed, presentations such as this, and I was always going out to do presentations, but a lot of times nothing happened. And or some municipalities took forever, like 8 years in one case, and they never got anywhere. And then after 8 years, they still didn't designate, right? So what the message is, obviously, you need to build on the momentum. But in the late 90s, all of a sudden, wow, people then suddenly realize how important this tool is. And just, municipalities and communities in Toronto and Cabbage Downs, and they got together themselves and they raised the money and they went to the municipality and said, look, we want to go ahead with a district. And the municipality said, okay, well, you can pay for it, but you need to follow the requirements of the Act, etc. And since 2005, when the Heritage Act changes came into force, there's been 34 districts designated. So that's, in other words, despite the additional requirement of the plan, etc., it was clear that this is still such a significant, important tool that people, wanted to carry on. And if you want to know, comparatively speaking, how many districts, how many properties are designated, there's 18,000 properties compared to about 8,000 designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act. So it just shows you it's a significant number. So this is a brief overview. What are the districts out there? 60% roughly are residential. Just 36% are sort of commercial downtown, with or without residential component. And there's about 4 or 5, which I would say one or two. One is the institutional, the Fort in Toronto, which is a single property institutional. There's an area in Brantford, I think, just a grouping of churches. Some are kind of a mixed use, but there's one significant one, which is the last one. I talk about a rural industrial, because until recently, the districts were resident, commercial. Downtowns are really a clear kind of what you would expect in terms of the broader community needs. But there's not been any rural to date, really, except with the exception that I'm going to mention, and not any really pure industrial areas. So, I mean, this is something that you want to go back to your community and look at. Cultural landscape per se, just where the landscape is a primary or main component, those are being looked at, but I would say there is no district that really is what, I would say a cultural heritage landscape. But the provincial policy statement says, well, when you look at it collectively, a district is a form of cultural landscape, and you can use that provision in terms of, developing some community interest, and especially if you're a politician, to use that as the shall we say, the encouragement for your municipality to look into district designation. And as I get to the end of my presentation, I'll just let you tell, there's these tools and incentives I mentioned. The official plan provision I already mentioned about. You need to have official plan provision in place before you designate a district. And when you designate a district, you have to make sure that your official plan, after having gone through the community exercise and community input, that your official plan is then up to date, that ties in with the provisions of the Heritage District. Grants and loans. Section 39 of the Ontario Heritage Act empowers the municipality to give grants and loans to property owners, and in return, the loans can be repaid over a period of time. It can be repaid through a levy on your property tax, and grants are, basically most municipalities, a large proportion of municipalities do have small grants, and there are some municipalities out there, I think Windsor, Port Hope, where they're, through provincial funding in the past, they've reinvested the endowment, the funding that the province gave, and use that as the basis for giving grants. And I'll tell you a bit more about heritage property tax relief, because that's a very significant tool that was put into place early 2002. And just to mention, there are a lot of districts that are downtown districts that are also commercial improvement areas. So you have the two provisions under the Planning Act and a heritage district, where you can make use of the incentives under the Planning Act to enhance your district using the district guidelines, in terms of as a criteria for funding. I won't go through all the details of this one, but as I said, the heritage property tax relief is to us at the ministry a very significant tool. And to date, 40 municipalities have passed a bylaw to adopt a local heritage property tax relief program. And the types of properties that are eligible, they have to be designated, and the property owner has to agree to enter into easement or other form of agreement with the municipality. The eligible heritage properties qualify for tax relief between 10 to 40%. That's a requirement under the Municipal Act. It states that it has to be between 10 to 40%. The province shares in the cost of the local program through funding of the education component of the property tax relief. So when your property tax, if you look at the property tax portion goes to the local school board, that part is taken care of by the province. So when the municipality gives the tax relief, they don't have to send the check to the school board. Since 2002, there have been $4.6 million, that's the minimum that we know, that has been provided to eligible heritage property tax owners, heritage property owners. The provincial contribution is over 1.8 million of that total amount. And these are fairly kind of general figures, because municipalities, unfortunately, are a little bit behind when they report to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. So we find that their figures are always about a year or so behind. So. I'm just going to refer to two examples of of heritage districts where there's a plan, where the plan has played a significant role in the overall, shall we say, development or implementation. Those of you, everybody knows, about the Square in Goderich and the tornado and what happened. Now they had a district plan in place, but the plan was something like 1980 something. But despite that, they used the plan guidelines. When property owners came in for rebuilding, they said, look, the plan talks about two-story development, talks about certain types of material, and they use that as a basis for approving the new development. Some property owners were saying, well, we don't want 2 stories, we only want 1, and they managed to persuade the property owners to say, well, look, in terms of enhancing, making sure that the town centre is still, the character is still maintained, retained, they use that to resolve the height and design issues. And one of the things that, as an aftermath or as a key message is pre-2005, before 2005, there was no requirement for a plan. So the lesson here is it's a priority for the municipalities that don't have that up-to-date plan to look into updating their district plans. And I'm going to finish off just to tell you a little bit about the oil district. Oh, sorry, I mentioned I should have showed that to show you before and after the storm. The Oil Heritage District is pretty unique. It was a National Historic Site. Those of you who know the oil springs and the discovery of the oil in 1850s something. It's one of the oldest oil extraction kind of, projects in North America, I believe. And the municipality and a key property owner was looking for World Heritage designation under the UNESCO designation program. So eventually we said, well, why don't you consider it designating as district? Then you have the municipal and in fact provincial recognition. So that's what they did, and you can see it's a very small area. And those of you who hadn't been there, it's pretty unique. All you see is some kind of rural at the general level, pretty kind of rural environment. But when you look at the actual detail level, you see all these features of the industrial heritage. And I don't want to go into this, but they use the sort of national historic sites concept, and they looked at what we call level 1 historic resources, and it's very diverse, and I won't get into detail, including the existing of obviously the powerhouses, the little features on the landscape, but also the woodlots and topographic features, etc., etc. And this is an example of what is being protected. And you won't see it when you're driving around until you stop, or if you make an appointment with the owner, and he's so proud of these features, and he'll probably take you through a tour. And just Port Hope is another district that I always show as an example. It's a well-established district. In 1997, the ACO fought for a district, and there was a lot of resistance on council. Those days, the ministry had a kind of proactive role. I even had to attend the OMB, and I was a drop of the hat was asked, can I go on the stand to say how wonderful district designation is, there any problems? And fortunately, they got that through. And then in 2008, they decided to expand the district. So those of you who haven't been to Port Hope, take a look at it and at the area, and you won't have problems finding your way there, because one of Port Hope and Niagara-on-the-Lake, one of the 2 districts that actually have a sign. Now, if every district is signed, that would be great. 111 districts, that would be something that you could look at your local level. And that's the end of my talk. And sorry, I missed out on some details, but glad to talk to you about them after.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, we'll have plenty of time for questions. If it's not confusing enough to have 2 Paul Kings, I got the R on the wrong Paul King. Paul R. King, the real Paul R. King, is a lawyer, partner and practice group leader in Toronto, in the Toronto Real Estate Development Department of Fasken, Martineau, Dumoulin LLP, one of Canada's largest law firms. He is past president and current board member of Community Heritage Ontario, a member of the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario, Stratford Perth branch, and a member of the Heritage Canada Foundation. In St. Mary's, Paul is a member of Heritage St. Mary's, a friend and supporter of the St. Mary's Museum, and the owner and steward of 16 years of property at 109 Wellington Street North, designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. Paul has a wealth of knowledge about about heritage conservation, was the president of CHO for many years, and I was fortunate one day to be actually sitting beside him on a plane back from Newfoundland, and he regaled me with his great wisdom about heritage. And if you ever get a chance to ride on a plane, make sure you sit next to Paul. So, without further ado, Paul R. King.
So I'm going to talk about the Heritage District in St. Mary's, and it's a commercial district, and it's just going into place now. And for those of you who don't know St. Mary's, it's a town of about 6,000 people, and it's in Perth County. It's between Stratford and London, and it's in a river valley. It's in the valley of the north branch of the Thames River, and the commercial core is sort of down in the valley. And we started the process of thinking about a heritage conservation district in 2004. And we've had numerous public meetings. We've had 2 studies done. There was one study done by the Commonwealth Historic Resource Management Limited and one by Town Design Collaborative. And there were actually 2 bylaws passed. And Paul was talking earlier about the importance of adopting the plan. They didn't do that in St. Mary's, and so they had to go back and do it again. So it's been a lengthy process. The bylaw was passed, a number of months ago. It was appealed to the Ontario Municipal Board, and then that appeal has been withdrawn. And the interesting thing about St. Mary's is that I don't know that it's your average town. I don't think so. It's a town where people do pay attention to heritage. You can't live there without being exposed to the heritage landscapes and the heritage buildings. They're everywhere, especially in the downtown core. And one of the mottos of the town is carved in stone, etched in history. And even the official plan has these wonderful pen and ink sketches of some of the heritage buildings in town. So it's sort of front and center all the time. So you'd think in a town like that, why don't they have a heritage district? You'd think that this would have been one of the first places in the province to have a district, and yet that was not the case. In the plan done by Town Design Collaborative, this is the description of the downtown core. Developed in the late 19th and early 20th century, St. Mary's is a good example of the cultural and historical development of Ontario's small-town rural landscape. It is a historically rich community that is distinctive in its architecture and development. The combination of limestone buildings constructed from locally quarried stone, a scenic location in the river valley, a physically intact downtown, and the large number of well-preserved historic buildings all combine to give St. Mary's a distinctive feel and charm. So the picture on the left is the main street in St. Mary's, Queen Street, and you can see some of the heritage buildings. The building on the right is what used to be an opera house, and it's now apartment buildings, and it's one of the iconic buildings in downtown St. Mary's. It has an Ontario Heritage Trust easement on it. So what were the arguments against having a heritage district? I mean, the main one is this business about property rights, which is sort of an interesting argument. It's a real flashpoint. And a lot of people sort of think, I paid for this property, it's mine, don't muck with it. And they really resent government interfering with it. And I think underneath that is the real concern about, bureaucratic delays and, the frustration of that. And, when we're talking about the economics of having a heritage district and trying to improve the area, I think it's really important that in a heritage plan, the guidelines are really clear and that the process is fairly straightforward and that, the people in the town, working for the municipality are really try to help people with the process, rather than, increasing the frustrations and delays. Because I've heard, I'm a real estate lawyer, and every once in a while I hear about people, having problems dealing with the staff and municipalities and the delays. So to the extent that you can get rid of that, it's a good thing. One of the things about property rights that I find interesting is people think that their property is their own. But this woman sitting on the Moose really owns most property in the country, right? And what she does is, through the governments, is she grants you certain rights over property. You have a fee simple interest, or maybe you have a leasehold interest. But she retains all kinds of rights. And if you look at something like Section 44 of the Land Titles Act, you see all kinds of exceptions to your property rights. So she can expropriate your land, she can run easements through your land, she can tax your land, she can pass bylaws, through governments, things like heritage conservation districts. So the argument about property rights, and a lot of people think that property rights should be enshrined in the Constitution. It's really nonsense. It's really a myth that you've got those rights. But I think the underlying concern about, bureaucratic delays and everything is something that we all have to be mindful of. Another argument that came up was, we care about heritage in St. Mary's, so why do we need a district? Why do we need all this bureaucracy? And then you start looking around downtown and you see exactly why you need it. The building on the right is the Bucker 2, and if you look at the upper story, right, there are windows that are closed in, the paint job is ugly, it's a bit of an eyesore, and that's right on the main street. If you look at the one on the right, the transom window has been filled in, there's an air conditioning unit over the door, and that door is not an original door, it's totally inappropriate. And the most important thing is that building is empty. So the building is for sale or lease. And there are a lot of empty stores in downtown St. Mary's. And since I've been there for 16 years, there's just a constant turnover of a lot of the retailers. So hopefully with a district, that's going to stop happening. And I'm interested to hear about Collingwood because they've had a district there for about 10 years. And I think it's useful to look at the contrast. So these are two more buildings. The business on the cheese shop on the left is actually quite a successful business. The building is not so great. What happened there was a fire, and the original building was destroyed, and this was the replacement building. Now, if there had been a heritage district, you'd have something that's much more appropriate for its neighbors. The building on the right was an old Traders Bank. And again, it was a beautiful building in the 19th century, but then there's that band around it and, the stone on the bottom, the angel stone, and the signage, which is totally inappropriate. If there'd been a district, none of that would have happened. Again, the picture on the left, there was a big hotel there that burnt, and it was replaced originally with a gas station, and there were gas pumps there, and then Max Milk, and the siting of that building is not appropriate for the surroundings. On the right is the center of town, at Tim Hortons. It's rare, I think, now for a town not to have one. But what's interesting about this one is you can see the SUV in behind there. That's the drive-through window. And here we've got the War Memorial. So on November the 11th, when they have a minute of silence, what you're listening to is people ordering their double-doubles and their donuts. These are two bank buildings in town. The one on the left isn't too bad in terms of scale and everything else, but it replaced an old heritage building that was there. It was a general store. The one on the right is interesting. That's the Royal Bank. That is a heritage building, believe it or not. And the only part of it that's visible anymore is the cornice. So the Royal Bank came in, I think this was in the 1970s, and it was a brick building, quite an attractive two-story brick building. They completely wrecked the facade and put in these windows with the round tops, etc. So it's a bit of a travesty. The interesting thing is the bank wants to redo this, and now they've got to deal with the Heritage District. And there are already discussions going on with the bank. And on the committee, person who sort of deals with these things was saying, maybe we should wait and talk to the bank later. And I said, no. You go and talk to them now, and you have a dialogue with them. And hopefully, this facade is going to be improved so it sort of fits into the surroundings, and that the signage is fixed as well. So you can see, even in a town like St. Mary's where people care about heritage, you still need a district. And a district is very useful. And I think Michael may talk later, maybe in the question period, about other tools that you can use, but it's probably the most effective in dealing with the overall landscape. So things like, Part 4 designations are very nice, but that doesn't protect your vacant space, right? It doesn't protect spaces like that Scotiabank building, which is not a heritage building. One of the other arguments was about outsiders. Unfortunately, all the members of the Municipal Heritage Committee do not own buildings downtown, don't own businesses, and most of the town councillors are in the same position. So there was this feeling that this was something being imposed on building owners and business owners. And the thing is, and this is probably true in a lot of small town Ontario, there's a real resistance to change. So everything's changing around you, but people aren't interested in anything new. I swear if you offered to hand people cash, they'd sort of wonder about it, right? And they'd probably reject it. And it was like that in St. Mary's. And, as a result, the end product was a bit of a compromise. But when you're doing a district, if you can have people in the area who are involved in the process, it's much better in terms of sort of selling the process. And I mean, the interesting thing is, like, who wins in the end, besides the whole community? It's those people who own businesses and buildings in the district who are going to win in the end. This building on the right is an iconic Ontario building. It's designated under Part 4. It was a jewelry store from the 1880s when the building was built until last year. It's now empty, and it's for sale. $350,000, and it's yours. It's a gorgeous building. So, like, a heritage district is not the answer, but it's certainly part of the answer. Another thing that came up that really surprised me was about boundaries. I thought, it should be pretty easy to sort of figure where you're going to, have the district. It was the thing that was talked about more than anything else. And both the studies that were done for St. Mary's stressed two things. One was the viewscapes, because you've got a town where the commercial core is down in a valley, so it's the viewscapes up the hills. And the other thing was the development sites. And there were a number of fairly influential people in town who wanted a smaller district. And the end result was the smaller district. So some of the things that I think from an economic standpoint are important to preserve are not preserved in St. Mary's. So if you look at this plan, the part that's outlined in black is the district that's in effect now. And if you look at the waterways are not protected. On the east and the west, there are those yellow areas. Those are the viewscapes from where you come into town and then come down the hill. And then to the south, there are development sites, and to the north, none of that is protected. So these are parts of the areas that aren't protected. This is the viewscape coming in from the east, and you're looking down the hill, and you can see the tower for the town hall. That's in the district, but this side of it's not protected. And then there's a development site near the river. That's not protected. That's, Canadian Tire store. That's just where that van is. That's the boundary line. So if that ever gets redeveloped, right, it's not within the district. There's another area that's not protected. That's the viewscape along the river. That bridge is subject to an Ontario Heritage Trust easement, but otherwise none of that is protected. And this is Trout Creek. There are two bridges there that are subject to Part 4 designations, but it's not part of the district. On the bright side, I think that, there's this saying by Carl Benz, Mercedes-Benz, and his attitude was the best or nothing. And I think when you're dealing with politics and heritage districts and trying to work on these things, if you're striving for the best, you're going to end up with nothing. So what you have to do is compromise. And that's what we've done in St. Mary's. And if you ask me, it's much better to have a compromise than to have nothing at all. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Paul. Our final speakers are Rick and Anka Lex. Rick and Anka have fused arts, heritage and restoration into several successful projects in Collingwood's downtown heritage district. Anka, a potter, ceramicist, and Richard, a former member of the Heritage Committee, restored the once doomed Tremont Hotel. The Arts Building received the ACO Provincial Peter Stokes Award and a National Revitalisation Award. The couple is currently completing the adaptive reuse of a neighbouring former newspaper building into multiple creative studios, helping to revitalise part of the district into a cultural destination. I met Rick 5 years ago now at it was a DIA's conference in Collingwood, and it was probably one of the most inspiring presentations I've ever seen. I was part of the panel on the same subject, heritage districts and economic development. And since that time, I've used many of the examples of what Rick and Anka have done in my work, trying to encourage people to do great things. It was a really good presentation what we did in Collingwood, wasn't it? The only thing is, you know what they did? They ran us up against a brewery tour of Primrose Springs, so no one showed up. But you're going to get to hear what they should have heard. So here it is, Paul and Anka. I mean, Rick and Anka.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you to Bill Smith for inviting us here today. Bill was a great help when we had the conference a few years ago in Collingwood, so we're happy to be here today. We're going to talk a little bit about the adaptive reuse of 3 buildings on Simcoe Street in Collingwood and our efforts to create a creative community there. Also want to speak for a few minutes at the beginning about the Collingwood Downtown Heritage Conservation District and how it works and some of the results we've seen, because it's been in existence now for 10 years. And we'll talk a bit about the restoration of the Tremont, and Anka will describe how we've chosen to really focus on arts and culture as a use for these buildings. So Collingwood, of course, is very similar in many ways to Midland. We're located on Georgian Bay. We have a heritage downtown. We're of a similar size. We're perhaps maybe 20 years or so older, but same basic age. Lots of landmark buildings, and tourism is growing of importance as an economic driver. And that ever more increases our need to protect our heritage. Here we have a map of the district. It's outlined in red. As you can see, it takes in the Spit and the terminals and essentially all of the commercial portion of the downtown and a little bit of residential areas. Essentially, it aligns with our BIA. There's 280 properties in our district. And there was some controversy, as Paul mentioned, there can be when the district was decided where the boundaries would be, and actually one street was left out as a result of a OMB appeal. They decided it was simpler just to leave the street out rather than let it go to the OMB. You'll notice the yellow properties. Those are Part 4 properties outside the district, and every year numerous or several property owners come to the Heritage Committee and ask for their properties to be designated under the Heritage Act, which I think really shows the recognition of the value of a heritage designation. So we have a number of programs. I won't go into any detail here, but we have heritage grants. The Heritage Committee has a Heritage Award for restoration. There's also a property tax relief program. I believe over 60 properties are enrolled in that now. And we also have a major redevelopment and restoration tax program. And Lindsay Cook, the chair of the Heritage Committee, is here today. So if you have any questions, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer them. Lindsay, can you give us a wave? She's right over here. We also, another aspect of our community is to, or the Heritage Committee is to provide outreach by the Heritage Committee and our local ACO branch. One of the tools that we use is a semi-annual Heritage newsletter, and we have a bunch of copies here. You're welcome to take some afterwards. We have an active ACO branch in Collingwood, and it's played an important role in saving a number of buildings, including the Tremont. The ACO and the Heritage Committee also work together on such things as a lecture series, exhibits, and workshops. So over the last 10 years, and that's how long the district has been in existence, we've seen a remarkable improvement in the downtown streetscape. The majority of the storefronts during that period of time have undergone renovations, all of which have required a heritage permit. And so you've seen this improvement in the streetscape. Also, other things that have improved that have always been an issue in old downtowns are the parapets. So with heritage grants, a lot of the owners have decided to fix their parapets. We've seen improvements in the windows, proper windows being fitted into the buildings, and also a tremendous improvement in signage, which is something the BIA really appreciates because it's one of the efforts they've been undertaking. But with the heritage plan that we have, we've seen tremendous changes in the signage. So I like to use this quote, the preservation movement has one great curiosity: there is never a retrospective controversy or regret. And that's by Canadian economist John Kenneth Galbraith. And it's not often you can get an economist to say something positive about preservation. But it's such a true statement. And certainly in the buildings that have been saved in Collingwood, and in the case of the Tremont, which would have been a parking lot, there hasn't been any regret. Where we have had regret and controversy, and lots of it, is the Admiral Collingwood School project. And I'll bring this up because I know a number of people have followed this over the years. Even though the building was in the Heritage District, it was designated, council approved demolition. One of the flaws, I guess, in the Heritage Act, there's no appeal. 8 years ago, the building was demolished. There was a condo project proposed. There was a disagreement over the height. Eventually it was approved. It was approved twice, in matter of fact, both at 5 stories and then later on at 7. Currently now that project has been cancelled. We've got a large hole at the end of our main street, and I think very little prospect of any development there in the near future. On the north end of the main street, we used to have the shipyard buildings. They closed over 25 years ago. Unfortunately, every single building was demolished, even those that had some potential adaptive reuse. This happened before we had a heritage district. Only a small portion so far has been redeveloped, and the project currently is stalled, and we're left with a sort of a vast tract of vacant land. So hopefully now council has learned that the policy of demolish first, ask questions later is not working. The successes we've seen in Collingwood have been numerous, but they've been smaller individual properties. But together we have seen a tremendous transformation in the Heritage District. While the big projects, or I like to call it just roll the dice kind of projects, have resulted in only regret and controversy. So here's a view of the Tremont. This is the late 1920s. The Tremont House was built in 1889 by John McCormack as a 24-room hotel. It was one of the last remaining 19th century hotel buildings in Collingwood, and was actually rated exceptional in the district's inventory of buildings. So this is a great picture. It was the one we used when we restored the building. You can see the parapets are still intact. You can see the chimneys. Imagine what a dramatic sight that would have been in the middle of a cold winter's night with smoke coming out of all those chimneys. It also shows the building before it was painted. The brickwork is an excellent example of late 1800s design and interesting embellishments. Here's a picture of John Chamberlain. He was the builder, well known in Collingwood for a lot of masonry work. He actually completed the construction in the spring of '89 in only 3 months. The other picture is of John McCormack, who was the proprietor and the owner of the building, and he owned it probably well into the 1920s. So the history of the Tremont is, this is what it looked like when we purchased it. It was originally purchased by the town in 2005 with the intention to demolish the building for parking. Of course, it was controversial because of the potential demolition within the Heritage District, but also that because the town excessively overpaid for the property. A 4-year stalemate ensued, with many people in the community wanting the building retained, and this was a battle that was led by the ACO and the Heritage Committee. It also shows, this is a great picture to show where we started with the construction. You can see that the parapets over the 100 or so years had been lost, the chimneys were gone, the building had been covered in paint, and the windows, the nice original windows, had been replaced by undersized vinyl windows. And then in the 1980s, this very unsympathetic brick layer was put around the main floor of the building, really destroying the symmetry. Anka and I put forward a proposal when the town offered the building for sale through an RFP process. 4 bids came forward, and ultimately the town entered into negotiations with us, and as of June 2009, we closed the purchase of the building. The town did retain 80% of the property for parking, and we essentially only purchased the footprint of the building. So it was very much a win-win. The town did get their parking ultimately, and the building was saved. The price was $100,000 and included conditions for its use as a cultural building, and also committed us to incorporate some environmental features in the building. So the project involved the preservation, revitalization of a designated building and the use and its reuse to provide commercial opportunities and live-work space for the creative sector. So here we are, day one. Basically, we had some big structural issues to fix. You can see in the picture on the left, it still shows there was a sort of a 1960s addition that the town itself had torn down because it was not protected, and they did so in such a way that I think they were hoping the rest of the building would fall down. So it left us with a number of major challenges. One of the first jobs was to remove the facade, the brick that they had put on in the 80s, and once we had done that, you could start to see the symmetry of the building. And the neighbors who had originally been very concerned when we purchased the building, thinking that, this was just going to be another quick little renovation, they started to, I think the tide started to turn towards us, and they were actually becoming supportive when they saw the potential of the building. I think the most challenging part of the restoration, and the entire interior of the building was gutted. We were able to save the wood floors, which we removed and later put back. But otherwise, we got the entire interior of the building. On the exterior, the most difficult part was the cleaning of the brick, taking the paint off, and which we hired a company from Toronto who was one of the only ones we could find that could do a good job on that. This is a few months along now. The west side of the building, we designed an addition, which you'll see, just to kind of create a bit of a face on the west side, because it's such a blank wall, and the addition has a roof garden. It allows an area for the artists to go outside, or the tenants in the building, and it also gave some extra room for the cafe. Here you can see the results of the removal of the paint on this first bay here. Unfortunately, that was only half the job, because then we actually had to clean the brick. We weren't, obviously, for obvious reasons, not going to sandblast it, and through a series of very gentle acid washes, we were able to remove that. But basically is carbon. It's just an environmental staining. The building was located right next door to what used to be the train yards and only a block away from the shipyard, so a lot of coal used in those days really darkened the color of the brick. And there you can see all the work was done off scissor lifts. Next. And again, just progress. Here you can see the old windows, and then we put in a new double hung 2/2 wood windows. And we actually used wood sills as well, because as originally there were wood sills in the building, we just wanted it to be historically correct. Rebuilding of the parapets was a big expense, but I think we felt it was essential to do this historically correct and to keep with the original design. So again, we were able to take measurements from this photograph, the only evidence we had of the original parapets, and they were all completely rebuilt. I think we required about 3,000 bricks that Anka and I and our son collected around southern Ontario. Whenever there was a building that we found was of similar brick and that was being demolished, we went and got some of those bricks. So the chimneys don't work anymore, but they're still there for decorative purposes. And we were very careful also with choosing paint colors. We were able to find some original window frames, and were able to determine what had been the original colors of the building, and we went back to that. There's the grand opening. It was a very successful event. The community came out in full force. And the picture also shows the Collingwood Library, the new Collingwood Library, which was basically being built at the same time we were restoring the Tremont. Our next project then, as we saw that this had been successful and that we were able to lease the building, we turned our attention to a property across the street which had come up for sale, which was a duplex, an 1870s duplex. And it had been boarded up for 5 years. It stood vacant. It was part of the newspaper property. They had purchased it with the idea of demolishing it for parking. But because of the heritage designation, they weren't able to do that. So we were able to purchase that along with the newspaper building. It's now actually home to the Enterprise Bulletin. They've downsized over the years. And they've moved in there. We've been able to keep them as tenants. And we've also put 4 artist studios in that building. So this is all just basically across the street from the Tremont. That's the 1988 newspaper building. It was built by Thompson Corp. It's sort of a bland industrial design with minimal windows. But it was a well-built building and has high ceilings, so there was a lot of potential. We opened it up with some glass, with 5 new storefronts, and created a central hallway and divided the building into 8 studios. And Anka will talk a little bit about that in a moment. So here's another picture. You can see the storefronts there. That's the Collingwood Community Food Co-op. So I'm going to pass it over to Anka. She will describe how we fuse the arts and heritage to create some revitalization on Simcoe Street.
Good morning. I would like to start out by talking about the projects we have completed prior to our work at the Tremont. About 12 years ago, we built my first studio, and as I was working and creating my pottery in the studio that was open to the public, it became evident that other artists were intrigued by the idea of having a studio in a public place. A studio that is open to the public helps sell the artwork, as it gives the artwork more authenticity. And this is a picture of a commercial building in downtown Collingwood, which we restored in 2003. Upstairs is the historic Maple Leaf Hall, a space that had been built as a dance hall and later being used as a meeting hall for shipyard workers, but had been vacant for over 20 years. We restored that space and rented it to a collective of artists for a number of years. When we started work on the Tremont, the artists in the Maple Leaf Hall became interested in moving to the Tremont. The idea of having their own space to give it their own flair and feel, yet have still the company of other artists appeal to them. The artists saw the vision Rick and I had for the building and very much wanted to be part of that. It was reassuring to have a core group of artists when we started to work on the Tremont. The studios are on the 2nd floor and are the original size and layout of the old hotel room. The smallest is about 9 by 12 feet, and they range in price from $275 to $700 a month. All the doors are vintage and are collected from the Collingwood area, and each door has a window, so when the artist is away, people can look into the workspace. To see an artist's workspace is inspiring to the public. We have 9 studios and 12 working artists at the Tremont. Unlike the Maple Leaf Hall, the Tremont we do not run as a collective. We look at them as individual businesses and do not put any regulations on gallery hours or obligations to participate in any events. It is up to the artists how they run their business, and we feel that keeps their creativity more alive. The only commitment we ask for is that they give 3 months' notice. On the first floor of the Tremont is the Tremont Cafe. It's a Parisian-style restaurant, and the Tremont Art Space, which is rented for art events, functions, art classes, workshops, and other events. The art space is great for the building because different events bring new people to the Tremont. We also have 2 Georgian Bay artisan markets in the summer, one on Canada weekend and one on the August long weekend. Now across from the Tremont is the former newspaper building. We renovated this building last year, and it now houses the Theatre Collingwood Studio Theatre, a dance school, a coffee house, an antique store, a co-working space, and a few weeks ago we had the grand opening for the Collingwood Community Food Co-op. It's a great mix of interesting tenants that all complement each other. And again, the hallway that connects all the businesses inside functions as a gallery. The exhibits change every 3 months. In the winter, the ACO had a historic exhibit about Collingwood's most known architects. And for every exhibit, we hold an opening. It is very important to us that we create a sense of community instead of a collection of just businesses. By bringing people together, it creates a sense of belonging, and it creates and great collective projects come out of those gatherings. It is also a great way of marketing, as it always brings new people to the buildings. And this spring we had the street festival called Day of Delight. The Toronto Clay and Paper Theatre came up to help us get started, and this now will be an annual event. Simcoe Street was closed, and everybody who participated had a lot of fun, and it brought out new people, and this helps grow our Simcoe Street community. And now back to Rick.
So just to finish off and sum up some of the lessons that we learned out of these projects. So first of all, that Heritage District protection was absolutely essential. Despite all the imperfections of the Heritage Act, without the Heritage District, the Tremont and the duplex certainly would have been flattened for parking. It essentially gave time for the ACO to rally support and to save the buildings. The other thing is authenticity matters, absolutely. One of the reasons we've seen such a good demand for our spaces, in fact, there's a waiting list for the studio spaces, is that you can't recreate authenticity. Whether it's an 1880s hotel or a 1980s newspaper building, it's the real thing. In particular, it attracts young professionals and those in the creative sector. The adaptive reuse, we were able to keep costs down, obviously. How do we do that? Well, first of all, there's no need for a long, expensive planning process. There's no need for rezoning. There's no delays with site development or costs with site development, or ultimately an OMB fight. We were able to start work the day after we closed on this property. And even though the buildings were entirely modernized, they still came in well in terms of cost under the cost of new construction. Demand for small, affordable space. This is something that we hadn't seen being offered in Collingwood. So certainly when we were able to provide a small space with flexible terms where people were not required to sign long leases, even though in general the tenants have stayed, that became a big advantage. And one thing I wanted to mention too, that during this process there were no heritage grants that we were able to use. There were also no grants for any of the arts. So we've done this completely in the private sector without any assistance. And finally, to create a community. Within this block of Simcoe Street, there are now 24 small independent businesses, all creatively based. The food element, which includes the Tremont Cafe, the coffee house, and the food co-op, also add to the community feel. We also make great use of social media, Facebook and website, and we also do some collective advertising with the tenants together and a lot of promotional events. So we hope you have a chance to come and visit us in Collingwood. We have a website. If you want to send us an email, we'd be happy to give you a tour. Our website is whatsonsimcoestreet.com. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Rick and Anke. Have you ever considered moving to Grimsby? I'm going to ask our presenters to come up to the table up there, and we can have we've got a good 19 minutes of questions. So if you'd like to go up there, and if anyone has any questions once they all get settled. So we heard from Paul King, without the R, about the benefits of heritage designation, types of districts. We learned about how approximately 1/3 of our districts have a commercial component. We learned from Paul R. King about the heritage district process in St. Mary's, and the key message that I certainly carry in my work, that it's better to have a weaker district than have no district at all, and you can always build upon it. And I think sometimes people just need to see how it works, and it's great to see a place like St. Mary's finally getting a district. And I was inspired 5 years ago, and all this stuff is like new stuff that I've not seen before. So I'm very inspired by what Rick and Anke have said with their presentation about the Tremont Hotel and just how they're infusing arts and culture and economic development all together. And it's a type of economic development that really enhances community and livability. So it's the best that you can ask for. So are there any questions? Go ahead.
I think the question is to Paul R. But maybe Paul and Mike might be able to answer this as well. I'm wondering, from start to finish, hiring a consultant to do an HCD study for community, what does it cost? And on the other hand, can staff do some of the work?
In St. Mary's, there are no heritage planners at all. There's one planner in all of Perth County. So there really wasn't the possibility of doing it locally. So I think the whole process in St. Mary's probably cost $50,000 to $60,000. And the worry was, if it had gone to the Ontario Municipal Board, they had, in the budget, they had $50,000 set aside. Fortunately, that didn't happen. But each study cost about $20,000, so it's an expensive process. Now, there are some places that have done their own studies, but I mean, my feeling is it's better, you get what you pay for. It's better to have professionals. I think, didn't Elora, somebody may know, but I think in Elora, they have a district where they didn't hire anybody. Not Elora?
Univo, we did it in-house, but we probably ended up spending $50,000 to $60,000 worth of staff time. So it equates to that.
Yeah.
The one thing I find is that you can't really just go and say, let's do a district, because it's not going to work that way. My experience in Aurora and Unionville is you have to sort of work upon it incrementally with small meetings and bigger meetings and getting people to buy into the concept, and then do your district study. And so in Aurora, we had our clerk required the bylaw enforcement officers to walk around to all the houses in the neighbourhood to sign that they understood what Heritage District was about, and then we got the study in effect, and it was approved, and there's still a few bumps along the way, which is inevitable. I mean, you have to plan for that, and because it's expensive going to the OMB, and it's also divisive, because even if you win, sometimes you lose. So again, if you can compromise your way out of it, it's probably a good way of doing that. So.
Yeah, just want to add
it really depends on the area, the community. In some communities, the Heritage Committee has a lot of knowledge, experience, and in those areas, they're able to, put together even a sort of like a conceptual plan or RFP. Now, what in the past happened when the economy was probably not that good, there used to be consultancies to be able to come out and say, well, gratis, we're just going to give you some kind of a kind of basic assessment in terms of what you want to do and what you can do, and then later on they bid on it, and some of the plans have come in very low. I'd say sometimes 10, 15,000, depends on what has already exists. Do you have a good inventory, size of the area, etc., etc. But obviously there's no substitute for we have a council that I remember Vaughan one day, we got $90,000, let's do a study. Well, how does that commitment come about, right? So somewhere they recognize that there was a need for council to put that in the budget as opposed to somebody trying to do it on the shoestring. But I know Markham did Unionville in-house, but by that time there were heritage planners on board who was able to do it with volunteer help, I believe, right?
No, it was me.
No?
Okay.
Okay.
I didn't see a weekend in 1997. It was awful. So please.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Regan. Regan did a good job too. So, the questions next.
If I can just follow up on that. The fundamental issue about Heritage Conservation District plan, because it is appealable, we must be very rigorous. And the more rigor that's applied to the plan in terms of research and definition and assessment is what gives the Conservation District plan its strength, and also, of course, information that everyone can draw on when you draw conclusions. These are the kind of things that stand up at an Ontario Municipal Board when you can display the rigor that was done in the analysis. And, that sometimes it can be done in-house, but also with the correct professional involved, you can have a plan that's quite rigorous and can withstand sort of the attacks that it will undergo during its approvals process.
I think that's what happened in St. Mary's, that sometimes lawyers are useful. So the people who were appealing the district, I think they talked to their lawyer, and he said, basically don't go ahead with this, you're wasting your money, because the plans had been done so well, and it was so obvious that should be a heritage district.
Yeah, next. With the red.
Yeah, I heard two things that I just wanted, not so much a question, but just maybe some just general comments on. One, and this was kind of glazed over, that it seems like it's important not just to have the district plan in place, or at least plan, but also a good BIA, because the segue to that is someone paid for it. You two guys there at the end, you put up your money to put that project into place. That was, like you said, all private sector. Comments, because the money's got to come from something a little more pragmatic. I love seeing this stuff done. Having had to cost these things out for clients, I know what it costs. So, please. Silence, sorry.
No? Okay. In terms of the cost of the project, or the one comment let me make, first, you need a strong BIA, you need interested and committed potential property owners to do this. You also need a strong ACO, because without the ACO, I don't think we would have saved some of these buildings. They we would have lost them. The council was determined in many ways to demolish the Tremont, but they didn't want to pay the political capital, or the political capital to go through that demolition. So that, making enough noise and having committed a group of heritage advocates was really key. And what was the second part of that question?
Well, actually, you talk about both, but just the fact that there's a certain amount of upfront money that's got to be put into this in order to actually do the work, to actually make it usable for the map to be a project.
But we also had a number of tenants lined up before we even started construction on the Tremont. So that was very reassuring. We knew there was demand for small space because of the work we had done prior to the Tremont. So.
And we did have a credit union that was quite cooperative and ready to finance this. So they certainly saw the plan and the fact that we had tenants lined up that we were able to go ahead with that.
Do you have a strong BIA?
We have a very strong BIA.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Well, that's
Very supportive.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the key things about a district is when you're investing, it gives maybe financial institutions a greater sense that the next guy along the way is going to be doing the same thing, that you're just not someone in the wilderness doing this, that can make it more attractive for funding.
I was wondering how you sell the idea of a heritage conservation. I was wondering how you sell that idea of heritage conservation district to the people that are affected, because I know there's a lot of issues when properties become designated. For example, getting insurances on a designated property is a lot of it. Some insurance companies won't, let's say, insure a designated property. A lot of times the value of the land is what you can do with your land has some impact on what its value is. So if someone realizes they're stuck with what they have currently, so how do you go about selling the idea?
Well, the issue of insurance, and I've heard this before, but we've never had an issue with it at all. We own several heritage properties. It's never been an issue in terms of increasing our insurance rates. I think it's pretty clear that the heritage designation, at least in Collingwood, has increased the value of all the properties downtown. So I think there hasn't been an issue with people being concerned about that. We have limits to height in downtown Collingwood anyway, which are the same as the heritage district, so that hasn't been a concern.
In St. Mary's, one of the objections to the Heritage Conservation District was the concern about insurance, and there was an insurance salesman from Cooperators who came to town to say, if there's a district, your insurance is going to go up 30%. So we had a meeting with business owners and property owners from downtown St. Mary's, and we brought in an insurance broker who dealt with heritage properties in Goderich. And he explained how insurance companies deal with insurance and figure out risks and everything else. And he said, basically, if there's a company that says there's going to be an increase of 30%, don't deal with them. There are other insurance companies. And basically, there's no problem. But what was interesting at this meeting, these people who are objecting to the heritage district didn't care a hoot about what was said. In their minds, there was going to be a 30% increase. And no matter what this broker said, and this is a guy who'd been in business for over 30 years, right? He knew what he was talking about. They were not interested in what he had to say and didn't listen to it. So there's got to be a dialogue with people, and it's got to go on over a long period of time to deal with those kinds of objections. I have a heritage property that's been designated since the 1980s. I've never had a problem with insurance. Never.
Andrew?
Yeah, my question is for Rick and Anka, and it has to do with measuring the economic impacts directly of the work that you've been doing. So, do you have recordings or a way of showing how much money that you spent on your specific projects was spent within the local community, like within 50 kilometers of downtown Collingwood, and how much of it was spent outside the community?
That's actually a great point, and we sometimes bring that up. And we use that argument when we talk to council as well, in terms of this is all, with the exception of the firm from Toronto we hired for the brick cleaning. Everybody else was local. They were all small local contractors. The materials came locally, so that's an absolutely great point to make. Compared to the library, which was built at the same time beside us, it was a contractor from Toronto. He brought all his work, his crews in from Toronto. None of the local electricians, plumbers, or trades, they were all shut out of the project. So that was like a $10 million project that nobody locally was able to bid on. Where with our project, obviously much smaller, we were able to provide local employment. So Good point. So the vast majority of the project, whether it's 90% plus, for sure.
I probably can't say this enough, but like being able to point to a hard number and say, you know, this project cost $600,000 to do, of which $500,000 was spent locally. That's an enormous way of winning over hearts and minds of councillors and staff and people like that. So being able to point to direct examples like that is crucial. But my second question was, do you know, or even I have a rough sense of what the commercial vacancy rate is like in downtown Collingwood? Are there many vacant storefronts in Collingwood, or is it mostly full?
Actually, right, currently things have changed rather. Oh, Lindsay, go ahead.
I don't know. I was just, we've been discussing this, and I was thinking as we were talking about it that I should mention that in Collingwood, there is a certain vacancy rate still downtown, I think, due to the economy that's going on and problems that all downtowns are having. However, those buildings that people have invested time to do the restoration work to their buildings are attracting stable, quality businesses that are long-term businesses that are there forever. Whereas the businesses that are not working on restoration work have a very much a higher turnover than what you're seeing going in at things like pawn shops. So I think, as Raymond has said, the work itself does cost money, but it often is much less money than building a new building. And on top of that, you are going to win immensely with your economic return of having tenants or businesses that are going to be there for a really long time.
And certainly with our project, we don't have any vacancies at all. We actually have a waiting list for the artist studios. So.
Okay. Question over there.
My question is for Rick Yamanka. Thank you. The first two speakers spoke a little bit to the obstacles of establishing a heritage conservation district, one being the public impression, true or otherwise, that designation will bring with it a level of bureaucracy that's not there before designation. While you mentioned that adaptive reuse does keep costs down versus new development, what I'm wondering is, based on your experiences of adaptively reusing heritage properties, what worked well, and what can municipalities do to facilitate, in terms of incentives, financial or otherwise? You mentioned there were no grants in place, but even beyond those financial incentives in terms of permits, or what would help facilitate such developments as yours?
We did have a lot of cooperation with the building department staff and planning staff with the Tremont. They were quite happy that someone was going to take it off their hands and do something with it. So we did get exemptions to site plan. We weren't required to do a full site plan agreement. We did have certain legal fees that might have occurred to us that the town handled. We received, we entered into a parking agreement with the town that it was something that if it wouldn't have been a heritage building, we wouldn't have received that kind of cooperation. So there were many areas that they worked to help us. They created a small green space beside the Tremont instead of just parking. So there's all kinds of tools that I think are allowed under the provincial policy statement for councils to create incentives that are not necessarily any dollar figure, but are helpful. So we had lots of cooperation, and also from the building department and providing their knowledge towards the restoration as well.
Were you held up at all by the bureaucracy, or did you
No,
feel that it was like a cooperative?
Absolutely not. Day one, they just made it very easy for us.
I've got 11:59, so there's one more question.
My name is Jerry Palmer. I'm from Bayfield. And of course, we've had various districts since 1982. Question I have is, the province has just brought into play heritage, buildings, facilities, viewscapes, agriculture, heritage farms, as you must start to gather an inventory. And we're just in the process of doing that. My question is, what kind of impact is that going to have on future development or designation, or being able to recruit designation within the Heritage Act itself?
Actually, I'm not very clear. You're saying that this is heritage. The province had brought in a requirement for heritage.
What we've been instructed to do,
Right.
and I understand that this is throughout the province. If you have heritage designated properties, you must develop an inventory of these properties in order to apply for government grants. It's part of the grant application process.
Yeah, actually, I'm not. Andrew, are you aware of that?
No.
That must be something. Unless
This
the
is
wording.
correct. I'm happy to chat with you or Paul, and I can chat with you afterwards, but the specific question, the way you worded it, doesn't resemble anything that the province has required. It really doesn't. There are underlying requirements, and this has been true since 1975, that the clerk of the municipality must keep a register of all properties that have already been designated. This is not a new requirement. This has been around for a long time, that if the council passes a bylaw designating a property, then the clerk must keep that property, the information about that property on the register. That's all.
What you're saying here, we don't need to develop this inventory.
You certainly are welcome to develop an inventory of new properties that you may wish to protect in the future, but you are not obligated to do so.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it up. We're pretty much we're past the time. So, but these fine folks will be around. We've got lunch break from 12 to 1:30, when you'll be hearing some other great sessions. I'd like to really very much thank Paul King, Paul R. King, Richard, and Anka for their amazing presentations today. I hope you were inspired as I was. And again, we're all around on emails. If any of you have any questions, I'm sure we can, or in the future. And that's thank you very much.
Really interesting. Absolutely amazing.